Dearly beloved tape aficionados, we gather here today to reflect upon this, the Yamaha MT4x, a 4-track multi-track cassette recorder. In this video we're going to have an overview of the features, just some very basic demonstrations of the recording functions. We'll begin by talking a little bit about when this came out and how much it cost. I've found a Sound on Sound article dating from May 1997. This was an article discussing the various multi-track cassette recorders that were on the market at the time, so I assume that this unit came out late in 1996 or early in 1997. The list price given in that article was £559. If we use the inflation calculator provided by the Bank of England, that's equivalent to roughly £1,065 in today money, which is about $1,360 in today money. It's about 10% more expensive in its recommended retail price than the Tascam 424 Mark II, which I would say is the closest equivalent. I would argue that the 424 Mark II is slightly more richly featured than this. This does have a 3-band EQ, but it's a fixed center frequency, whereas the Tascam had a parametric mid EQ. But otherwise, dual speed, 4 inputs, 2 auxiliary sends, these sorts of features, they're on a par with each other, and likewise in quality and usability. So if I could take a time machine back to 1997, I would sooner spend 500 quid on the Tascam than £559 on this. But in the present day, you're probably going to pick one of these up for as cheaply, probably slightly cheaper than a Tascam. Anyway, we will begin the review by assessing this unit in terms of my 5 factors, the first of which is size and weight. The footprint is about 41 by 31 centimetres. It's about 12 centimetres deep. It weighs about 4.5 kilograms. It's got an internal AC transformer, so the only lead you need is a generic figure of 8 lead that goes in the back here and plugs into the mains. This means that it'd be fairly easy to get on public transport. It's not heavy for one person to lift. If you had a big enough rucksack or a small suitcase, you could easily transport it from your home to a practice room and back. The second factor is tape speed and noise reduction. This unit will play back tapes both at the commercial speed of 4.8 centimeters per second or 9.5 centimeters per second. The higher tape speed is provided for better fidelity. You get a better response to high-end frequencies and a lower noise floor at the higher tape speed. Though in fact there are fun sound design sort of things that we can do by recording a sound at the higher speed and then playing it back at the lower speed, therefore dropping it an octave and vice versa. We have defeatable DBX noise reduction. Remember, DBX is an encode and decode system, so recordings that were recorded without noise reduction should be played back without noise reduction. DBX tends to be a bit more aggressive than Dolby, which is the alternative that you see on Fostex machines, but it does reduce the noise floor more. It's the kind of thing where maybe you want to boost the high end a little bit as you're recording with DBX, but we have the facility to do that with the high shelving EQs on this unit. And you want to be a little bit careful about big transients and low frequency instruments like bass guitar. But so long as you use a compressor or something on a clean bass tone, DBX works without much downside that I can hear. The third key factor is the number of tracks that we can record at once and the number of inputs that can be combined into a single or pair of tracks. We are able to record all 4 tape tracks on this unit simultaneously. We have 4 line inputs and 2 stereo auxiliary returns. All of those inputs could be combined at the master fader, so we can combine 8 inputs into a single track or 2 tracks presenting a stereo image. The auxiliary returns are intended to blend affected signals with dry signals, but they provide a way to connect an external mixer, external preamps, these kind of things to the tape recorder. The fourth key factor is the provision that we have for equalisation and effects. We have a 3-band EQ here, high and low shelf, with a fixed center frequency, mid-frequency control on a per channel basis. On each channel we have a control which allows us to send a copy of the signal to either auxiliary output 1 or auxiliary output 2, but not both at once. This would mean we could send a signal to a delay or a reverb, but not both at once from the same channel, and then we would return the wet signal, combining it with the dry signal at the master fader using the aforementioned auxiliary returns. And the last key factor is, does this have individual tape outs? It does. Why is that important? Well, you might want to mix your recording on a larger and more powerful desk, or you might want to create digital stem files and do your recording in a DAW or other digital recorder. When you capture the output of a motor-driven tape machine like this, it's important that you capture those tape outputs all in one pass and not in successive passes. The reason being that little inconsistencies in the motor speed would mean that subsequent passes were a slightly different length, which can lead to timing and phase problems. But with this unit, providing you've got the correct cables and a digital recorder or sound card with enough inputs, you can suck the tape sound out of this into the digital domain all in one go. So let's start to work through the features. We'll start at the top left and work our way down to the bottom right. Each mixer channel has a gain control. Line level signals, such as the output from a groove box or synthesizer, won't require any additional amplification, so we could leave that low down in that case, and we would have access to a little bit of boost above this grayed out area on the fader, or if it was too loud we could pull the fader down like that. If we've got an instrument level signal or a microphone level signal, then we can add a significant amount of gain here. 60 decibels according to the specifications provided in the user manual. The high shelf centres around 12 kHz, the low shelf centres around 80 Hz. That's higher and lower respectively than the high and low shelf EQs that we tend to see in Tascam. The centre frequency for the mid control is 1 kHz. All three EQ controls allow us to boost or cut their frequency range by 12 decibels. Each of the 4 mixer channels has an auxiliary control. There's an indented center point, 0, here at 12 o'clock. By turning to the left, we can send a duplicate of the signal that's passing through here to auxiliary output 1, which is mono. If we turn it to the right, then we send that duplicate signal to mono auxiliary send number 2. We can see then that we can access 2 effects, but not both at the same time from the same channel. Below the auxiliary control, we have these assign buttons. They're push-push. There's a 1-2 assign button and a 3-4 assign button. In order to record the output of this mixer channel to tape tracks 1 or 2, this one must be depressed. Likewise, if we want to be able to record the output of this to tracks 3 and 4, this one must be depressed. Below that, we have a pan control. When we're playing back a signal from tape, this control places that mono signal in a stereo field. When we're using the mixer signal as a preamplifier and tone modifier for the signal that's coming in the input, this pan control works in conjunction with the assign buttons in order to route the signal to the tape recorder. So if I wanted to record to tape track number 1, assign button 1-2 would need to be pushed down, and I would turn the pan control to the left because that's the odd side and 1 is an odd number. If instead I wanted to record to track 2, I would turn the pan control to the right, even, because number 2 is an even number. Similarly, if I want to record to track number 3, this one would need to be depressed. I would turn this to the left, and if I wanted to record to track number 4, I would turn it to the right. The button below the pan control controls whether the mixer channel is acting on the input signal or on the signal coming back from tape. In the down position, the signal from the tape player is being fed through this channel. In the up position, we're receiving an input at this input socket and we're sending it to the master fader and from there to the tape recorder. Here these buttons are for the auxiliary returns, similar to the buttons that we have for the 4 mixer channels. These buttons connect the signal that's coming back from the auxiliary returns to the 4 tape tracks. This is important if we want to combine the signals that are coming through this mixer with signals from an external mixer as we make a recording, or a more likely use case is when we're bouncing or tracking, we want to record a combination of the wet and dry signal, and so this allows us to feed the wet signal into the tape recorder. It's possible to turn up these auxiliary returns without assigning them to the tape recorder, and that way we would be able to do things like record vocals with some reverb or other effects without committing that effect choice to the recording. That way we could postpone the choice of reverb that we apply to our voice until a later stage, maybe mix down, maybe a bounce. So it gives us options like that. We can see the auxiliary return number 1 and number 2 have their own independent level controls, and that is a attenuation really of the input that's coming in on those sockets and how much of them is being combined with the signals from the mixer at the master fader. Below that we have a monitor select switch. That controls what we hear both from the headphone socket and also from a pair of RCA jacks that are on the back here. Those exist in addition to the line out RCA sockets, which are connected directly to the master fader and to the stereo meter over here. By using these push buttons, we can control whether we're hearing the output of this Q amplifier, more about that in a minute, whether or not we're hearing the stereo output, that's what's connected to the line out here, and what signals are going to be recorded by the tape player, both the odd side, that's tracks 1 and 3, and tracks 2 and 4. The level of signal received at those monitor out RCAs and at the headphones is controlled by this control here. The Q amplifier is provided so that the performers can have a different balance of signals that they listen to than what is being received by the tape player. To give you a practical example, perhaps you're playing your guitar over a drum part. The tape player is going to want to have as loud and as clear a signal as possible, so the sound of the guitar going through the master fader would be quite loud. But we don't want the drums that we're recording over to appear in the master fader at all, otherwise we would be creating an inadvertent ping-pong recording, and we want to have those drums much louder in our headphones as we play. Therefore, we can set up a separate mix for the performer using this little sub-mixer, the Q amplifier, and send that either through the monitor out or through the built-in headphone socket, whilst optimizing what is coming through the mixer and the master fader to suit what we want to end up on the tape. Here we see user pitch control. This gives us plus or minus 10% of pitch change. That's equivalent to about perfect fourth, maybe a little bit more up and down. The speed at which the cassette is played back is controlled by holding down this button to the right of the tape speed control, and you can see this liquid crystal display displays either 9.5 or 4.8. That's centimeters per second. We have a digital counter showing our position on the tape. We can reset that at any time by pressing counter reset down here, and we can shuttle to 0 at any point by pressing return to 0. I'll come back and show you the more complex memory features like memory 1, 2, locate, auto punch in, clear, these sorts of things a little bit later on. These record arm switches control which of the 4 tracks on the tape are going to be recorded over. If we send silence into the tape recorder, then that gives us an erase facility. Which signals end up on these tape tracks are controlled by the assign buttons and the pan controls for the mixer section, as previously discussed. I'll also be showing you how to do bouncing a little bit later on. We can turn DBX on and off using this button down here. You can see that there's a little segment of the display. It's actually vacuum fluorescent display, meaning that it's bright and you can see it in the dark. It's quite a nice legible display. We can see the signal coming from or to tape on these 4 segments here, and we simultaneously view the output through the stereo bus using the stereo meter here. This rehearsal button here switches these meters between showing what's coming back from tape and what's being received by the tape recorder if the corresponding tape tracks are armed. Record, pause, play, rewind, fast forward, stop. These are self-explanatory controls, and they're tactile switches, and it's a servo and solenoid driven cassette player that's in there. The headphone socket is a 1/4 inch, and we have a punch in-out socket here. I'll be demonstrating the use of that later. Like every other multi-track cassette recorder I've ever looked at on this channel, this unit was biased out of the factory for use with Type 2, that is chrome tapes. Without going into too much detail about it, this technology relies on mixing a high frequency alternating current sine wave in with the voltage representing the musical signals in order to work. Different tape types require a different amount of this AC bias. Type 1 tapes were the most common and cheapest and suffer from the highest noise floor and the poorest treble response. Type 2 tapes, by contrast, were more expensive because the noise floor was lower and the response to high frequencies was better. And for that reason, all the manufacturers decided that they would only recommend that tape type and would not provide features to be able to rebias the machine for type 1 tape. Now, if you put type 1 tape in here, it will record. It won't do any harm to the machine, although you would be wise to clean the heads with isopropyl more often because type 1 tapes tend to shed a bit more. However, in addition to the fact that that type of tape is, from a standpoint of fidelity at least, poorer quality than a type 2 tape anyway, this machine would be sending more of this AC bias to the tape than it ideally wants. And that means that things like poor high frequency response would actually be accentuated compared to making the same recording on a tape recorder that is biased for type 1 tape. Now, the effect that you get from that is a kind of low-mid preponderance and an extra crunchy saturated sound, which I've heard some people say that they like for their style of music. So it's all subjective in the end. You can go ahead and experiment with using type 1 tape in this unit. It won't do any harm. Maybe you'll like it. But if you're concerned with getting the best possible high frequency response and lowest possible noise floor, then you want to be using type 2 tapes in here. We'll take a look at the sockets on the back panel now. So going from the top left again, we have the monitor out. We discussed that earlier. So that gives us a customizable stereo output that we could send to an external headphone amplifier, pair of speakers, another mixer, whatever you want. And then the stereo out, I think I was referring to it as line out earlier, but that is connected directly to the master fader. And this is where we would want to attach a master recorder if we were making a digital or analog master recording. These are the microphone inputs, one per mixer channel. Because they are unbalanced, we want to connect to them with TS, that is tip sleeve mono jack sockets. So if we wanted to connect a microphone that had an XLR socket, then we would probably use a cable like this. This is a commercially produced cable that goes from a female XLR socket to a male 1/4 inch mono, that is tip sleeve TS jack. This will have been wired in such a way that we don't get any problems with buzzing and interference which can occur if we try and plug a balanced plug into these sockets. Second row down, we can see the right and left / mono 1/4 inch jack inputs for auxiliary return 2 and 1. This is switched in such a way that if we just plug into left mono, then the signal will be sent equally to the left and to the right side of the stereo bus. But if we plug into both, if the unit that you're connecting to here, say it's the stereo output of an effects unit with a balance control, then we would use that pan or balance control to set the width and position of these signals in the stereo field. And then here we have the auxiliary send output sockets, a mono output for auxiliary send 1 and for auxiliary send 2. The tape outs are here, corresponding to track 1, 2, 3 and 4. The sync button on the front panel directs the output from tape playback amplifier 4 to this socket only, so that the signal does not pass through the mixer. In that way, we can record FSK or other types of pulse information onto track 4 and synchronize external MIDI gear or other electronic gear. I'm going to demonstrate some of these digital memory features, rehearsal, punch-in, memory locations 1 and 2, without audio, so we're going to need to use our imaginations a little bit. 0 is the beginning of the song, 15's first vocal, 25's the first chorus. The bit that we want to record over lasts from 45 to 55, but in order to have a roll in, that is a bit where we get ready to record, the pre-roll is going to be at 35, and then on this model, rollout is always 10 counter units. So if our punch-in point was at 55, then we will roll out at 65. So let's get to roughly 15. Press play. When I hit 15, I pressed memo 1. Now if I stop this and hit locate beside memo 1, it's going to take me back to 15 or pretty close to. Now if we move the tape on to 25, that's where we said our second location was going to be. At that point I'll press memo 2 and that will set that location into this memory slot. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, there. Now if I stop there, if I press locate for memory 2, it'll take me to 25. If I press locate for memory 1, it'll take me to 15. and I can still return to 0 by pressing this button. Okay, so let's set up our auto punch in out. We said that we wanted the pre-roll to begin at 35, so we can get close to that by going to location 2 and wait for this to get to 0.35. Stop it there. So the first thing I want to do is press auto punch in out. Notice that auto punch is flashing, start is flashing, the amber light above the rehearsal button is flashing. So now we need to press a sequence of buttons. We basically press play to start. When we reach the punch in point, we press record pause, and then when we reach the punch out point, we press play again. The rollout is set automatically 10 units after the punch out. So let's do that. I'm looking to press record pause at 45, that's my punch in, and I want to punch out at 55, so I'll press play at 55. Here we go. Punch in, wait till it gets to 55, punch out. It's going to go up to about 65, and then it's going to rewind back to the pre-roll location, which was 35. We're now automatically taken into rehearsal mode. We can tell that we're in rehearsal mode because this yellow light above rehearsal is flashing. So watch the behavior if I just press play now. This continues to flash. It says start here. When we reach 45, it goes into in. So where we would be recording now, that's punched out. At that point, the rehearsal light goes off, and then it'll continue to 65 and go again. Now, providing I was happy with that, let's say it was track 1 that I was recording to, I would hit record pause and then play. Now watch, record light is flashing because we're in start mode, but as soon as we hit 45, we're in, so the red light is lit continuously, and it's turned out when we reach the out point. And it goes back to the start again. Imagining the take that I just did there wasn't any good, then again we would hit record, play, and we're going through the same sequence. Watch the red light turn solid as we reach the in point, and then as we reach the out point, it goes off again. And we could repeat that process as many times as we liked until we were happy with the take that we got. Then in order to leave auto punch mode, I just press auto punch again, and the memory locations will still be there. I can get to 15 by pressing this button. I can get to 25 by pressing this button. Imagining later on I was working on a later section of the song, I could simply replace those memory locations by hitting these buttons at new places, or I could just clear, and that wipes everything off. The memory isn't retained, so leave the unit on if you want to make use of this facility. Regarding the use of a foot switch, although the manual encourages you to use an accessory provided by Yamaha, that's not necessary. Any dual polarity foot switch with a tip sleeve that is mono TS 1/4 inch jack plug will work. In my case, I'm just using a piano sustain pedal. So with a track armed, if I hit record pause on the machine, pressing pedal once will start play, but the red light is flashing. I haven't started to record yet. I can commence recording by pressing the pedal once more, and I can exit recording by pressing it again. I would then have to go over to the machine to actually press stop. To demonstrate some basic playback facilities on the MT4x, I'm going to use this tape, Cold Cuts by the Brothers Nylon with Drome. Excellent record. I highly recommend you get your own copy. You see that when I put the tape in, I get this tape detection icon appearing in the VFD display. I have my near field monitors, which are just off screen, connected via the monitor out. None of these are engaged at the moment. So if I press play, although we can see that there is signal reaching the stereo out and coming from all 4 tape tracks, we can't hear anything yet. Let's begin by listening to the Q amplifier here. So if I press down Q and turn up this monitor level, we can hear the audio. So that's track 1, track 2, track 3 is backwards. That's because on a commercial tape, the left and right side of side A corresponds to track 1 and 2 on a multitrack recorder, whereas side B, left and right side, are printed in the opposite direction on what corresponds to tracks 3 and 4. So we're hearing backwards audio from tracks 3 and 4. If I press Q again, we don't hear that anymore. Let's listen instead to the stereo bus. I'll pull down everything here. Stereo is turned on, the master fader is turned up. If I press this button, this mixer channel is now acting on the tape signal. So if I fast forward to a section of the tape where there is signal on track 1 and turn up this fader, hear it. I can pan that mono signal from left to right using the pan control. I can add or remove low end, add or remove mid, or add or remove high end. In order to play back a tape like this, really I should have tracks 1 and 2 panned hard left and hard right respectively. That way I'm preserving the stereo image as it was recorded and duplicated. I can do a similar thing in order to listen to the backwards audio on side B of the tape. You'll note that that was playing back at 4.8 centimeters per second. If I change that while the unit stopped to 9.5 centimeters per second and turn it back up, you're going to hear it sound a bit like the Chipmunks. So if you hear very fast audio, check your tape speed. So I'm now going to demonstrate some very basic recording where first I track, that is record to blank tape, onto track 1, then I overdub onto track 2, overdub onto track 3, and then combine all 3 signals in a bounce to track 4 with some effects. For this demonstration, I'm not going to do anything very exciting musically. I'm going to do 3 crappy over-the-top British accents with my voice onto tracks 1, 2 and 3, and then we can hear the whole shitty teleplay on tracks 4 after the bounce. I'm using a not fantastic copy of an SM57 made by T-Bone. So this is in no way a sound demonstration, only a quick start guide for the recording. I'm connecting using a cable which has a female XLR socket at one end and an unbalanced, that's TS tip sleeve mono jack plug at the other end. When you're using unbalanced sockets, it's best to use an XLR to jack cable that was professionally wired together. That way there won't be any compatibility problems. Now I'm going to fast forward a bit, so I'm in a blank area of this tape. Then I'm going to reset the counter. That way when I get to the end of the recording, by pressing return to 0, I'll be shuttled back to this point. So let me just demonstrate that. I press stop and press return to 0, and it's going to just take me back to this place on the tape. Now, as I speak into the microphone, we can see the sound of my voice reaching the stereo meters. At the moment it's on the left hand side of the meter, but if I turn that pan control to the right, we can see it on the right hand side. So in this unit, the output of the mixer channels is always connected to the master fader. In order to connect to the record amplifier, we have 2 hidden buses. I say hidden because there isn't actually a fader associated with them. One is called the 1.3 bus and one is called the 2.4 bus. So if I arm track number 1, in order for the signal to be routed from the microphone to track 1 of the tape, first of all I need to make sure that the bus 1 to assign button for my input mixer channel is pushed down. Secondly, I need to make sure that my panning is set up correctly. Track 1 is an odd number, so I need to turn all the way left to odd. We can see the signal from my vocal reaching the stereo meter, but we can't see it reaching the track meter. In order to do that, I need to press either rehearsal or record pause. Here I'll press record pause, and now we can see the signal from my voice is also reaching the input of the track 1 record amplifier. I'm currently plugged into near field monitors through the monitor output. At the moment, none of these monitor select buttons are depressed, so you can't hear the sound of my voice being reinforced through the speakers. However, if I either push down stereo, you can hear the sound coming through there. So that's me listening to what's coming through this stereo fader. But it can also be useful for me to isolate what's going to be received by the record amplifier. So I'm going through the 1-3 bus, so if I push that button down, now you can hear my voice being reinforced again. There's a little bit of feedback because the microphone's picking up the speakers in the room. So actually when I record, I won't have that pushed down, so I will put the gain up so that my voice is hovering around maybe -3 to -6 decibels. That means the occasional peaks in my voice will cause a little bit of tape saturation, but you probably won't notice it. In order to start recording with record pause lit red, I then press play.
Yar! What manner of a vessel be this? Pieces of eight.
So that's me got a recording on track 1. I could use return to 0 to get back to 0. Disarm the track. Press play. We should see what I recorded appearing on the track 1 meter. If I engage stereo on the monitor select and press play again, we'll hear it coming through the speakers, providing that I first change what this mixer channel is acting on from mic line, which I was using to record, to tape.
Yar! What manner of a vessel be this?
That's my voice coming back through the speakers. Okay, I'm happy with my pirate voice. To make sure that I don't do any kind of inadvertent bouncing, I'm just going to pull down that mixer fader. I'm going to turn up the mixer fader for track 2. I'll plug my microphone into 2. Now, in fact, you can reach any of the 4 tracks on tape from any of the 4 mixer inputs just by using the assign buttons and the pan controls. In this case, I'm recording to track 2, so I want to make sure that the 1-2 assign button is pushed down. And because 2 is an even number, I want to have my pan control hard to the right. If I turn up the gain to about where it was in the other channel, make sure that this button is up so it's receiving the signal from the mic line. I'll turn off that stereo monitoring for the moment because I don't want to actually double up my voice, but you can see the signal reaching the stereo bus. When I arm the record amplifier for tape track number 2 and then press record pause, then you can see the signal is also reaching that input of the record amplifier. If I push down group 2-4 in the monitor select, then you'll hear my voice coming through the speakers, but that's leading to a little bit of feedback, so I'll just disable that. If I was using the headphone socket instead of the monitor outputs, which I'm only doing for demonstration purposes, then of course there would be no feedback issue. But anyway, those levels look good, so time for another accent.
Oh, bleeding blimey, that's a whopper. Is this an Australian accent or is it Cockney? I can't even tell myself.
So if I disarm that, set this button on channel 2 so it's now acting on a signal coming from tape, put the original one back, turn to 0, press play. I'm just going to change the panning, make sure that I can hear what's coming through the stereo bus using monitor select buttons, press play.
Yar! What manner of a vessel be this? Pieces of eight.
And here's track 2.
Bleeding blimey, that's a whopper. Is this an Australian accent or is it Cockney? I can't even tell myself.
Okay, that's a very satisfactory bit of shite. Let's move on. Again, to avoid any inadvertent bouncing, I'm just going to pull these 2 channels down. Just to prove that we don't need to be plugged into input number 3 in order to record to track number 3, I'm going to stay plugged in input number 2. So I'll bring that fader back up and I'll change this button so that this microphone channel is receiving a signal from my microphone and not from the tape player. But this time I want to be panned hard left and make sure that this 3-4 assign button is pushed down. Then if I arm track 3 and press record pause, you should see my voice coming through both the left bus and track 3. I'm going to disable stereo in this monitor select area. That takes my voice out of the near field speakers in the room. And I will go for vocal performance number 3. Jings Crevens and Fit My Bob. Fit a roaster. Amur Wally. Is this Aberdeenshire? I'm not really sure. I've not been there much. Disarm that. Now, in order to play this one back, I actually need to turn up track number 3, make sure that it's coming back from tape. And I'll put that faux Scottish accent into the center of the stereo image. I'll use return to 0 to get to the beginning of the recording. Turn up tape track number 1 as well. Push down stereo so we can hear what's coming through the master fader. Out the near field speakers in the room. Press play.
Yeah, what manner of this will be this?
So I can control the relative levels.
Oh, blimey, that's a whopper. Is this an
EQ
Australian accent or is it Cockney? I can't even tell myself.
And then here's our Scottish person.
Jings Clevens and Fit My Bob. Fit a roaster. I'm in a Wally. Is this Aberdeenshire? I'm not really sure. I've not been there much.
And yeah, I can also use the master fader to pull down the overall level that's coming back from all 3 tracks. Now, if I press return to 0 to get back to the beginning, let's say I want to add traffic noise, machine gun fire and a cat purring in 3 takes over the top of my teleplay. So I want to combine the signals from these 3 onto track 4. What I'm going to do then is pan all 3 of these to the right. I'm going to arm track 4. Make sure that all 3 of those channels have a sign button 3-4 pushed down, and make sure that they're all receiving their input from tape. What's happening here is tracks 1, 2, 3 of the tape player are being funneled through these mixer channels with whatever EQ I want to set. Actually, I've got it flat, and then that's being assigned to the 3-4 bus. Because it's panned right, then it's going to track 4, and with track 4 armed, a copy of what's on tracks 1, 2, 3 should be made on track 4. I am bouncing, I am ping-pong recording. To show off a bit more of the functionality of the MT4x, what I'm also going to do during this bounce is send a copy of all 3 of these signals that's coming from the tape through this mixer channel to the same spring reverb pedal. The way this is connected, auxiliary send 1 is connected to the input of the reverb pedal. The mix is turned to 100% wet. The output of the pedal is going into the left mono input of auxiliary return number 1. You can see that I have auxiliary number 1 turned up about 3/4 of the way, and the assign button for 3-4 is depressed. That means that the sound of the reverberation is reaching not only the stereo fader, also the inputs of tape amplifiers 3 and 4. I'll add just a little bit of the reverb to the first accent, more of it to the second accent, and even more to the third accent. So as I change my silly voices, you should hear more of the reverb.
Fit a roaster. I'm in a Wally. Is this Aberdeenshire? I'm not really sure. I've not been there much. Okay.
Right, if I return to 0 now, turn off the reverb, turn down the auxiliary bus, pull down these faders, set channel number 4 to receive its signal from tape, place it in the center of the stereo field, and play back the recording.
Yeah, what manner?
So that's the bounced recording.
Oh, bleeding blimey, that's a whopper. Is this an Australian accent or is it Cockney? I can't even tell myself. Jings Clevens and Fit My Bob. Fit a roaster. I'm in a Wally. Is this
so now I can pan it.
I'm not really sure. I've not been there much.
EQ it.
Okay.
What I can adjust is the relative levels. If I was unhappy with the relative levels of instruments you were combining in a ping-pong recording like that, you would need to redo it. Of course, you can redo it infinitely until you erase over the original material. And if you ever hear anyone saying baking an effect, that's what they mean. They mean printing the effect to the tape to a point where you can't adjust like the decay of the reverb or how loud the reverb is compared to the dry signal. One thing to note about the way things are routed through the MT4x is it is possible to create duplicates of the same sound or multiple tracks as you record. For me, as somebody servicing these, that's kind of useful because it allows me to do things like record the signal from this test generator to all 4 of the tape tracks at once. Now I've got the master fader turned down because it's quite a boring and irritating sound. But that's what it sounds like. But you can see with both these assign buttons pushed down and with the pan controlled in the center, the same signal is being sent to all 4 channels. If I just pull down that fader, then that changes the amount that's received by all 4 channels. So I'm getting a good steady -3 dB there. The main reason that I'm showing you that is that you need to be a little bit careful about what's armed and how these assign buttons are pushed down, so you don't create a duplicate of your information which may overwrite information on other tracks that you want to keep. So I'm going to record, let's say up to 15 on this counter. Okay, so where I rewind back, if I disarm those tracks, if I push down the tape button on these 4, raise the master fader, and you can hear that sound there. So I'll just show you how to erase. Let's say I want the sound to cut out at 5. So if I get myself to 5, arm on all 4 channels with the faders down, effectively I'm recording silence. What's actually happening there is the AC bias that's coming through the erase head is resetting all the magnetic domains on the tape. So the only thing that's there would be tape hiss, which the DBX noise reduction, which is turned on, takes care of. So we will just hear silence. So if I go back to 0, turn this up again so that we can hear what's coming back from the tape, disarm those tracks. We can hear the sounds until 4 and then it cuts out. We've erased. And even with DBX off and all the faders up, all we hear is a bit of tape hiss. Drum kit is a good instrument to demonstrate the sort of recordings where you're combining multiple microphones into a single track or a stereo pair, and also to demonstrate situations where you're recording multiple microphone signals simultaneously. Unfortunately for you, I'm not that great a drummer, so just bear with me. This is a how do you use the machine demo, not a look how great my playing is or how good the results are demo. I've got a pretty full complement of microphones here. I'm not going to be using all of them. I haven't placed them very carefully. The way they're hooked up, they're all going down into a snake here. And that's going to this rather complicated desk here, which I'm just using to provide phantom power. So in the following footage, you're going to see 1/4-inch unbalanced cables, that is garden variety guitar cables, coming from the line outs of this mixer into the line in of the MT4x. The other thing I'd like you to know about these recordings that you're going to be hearing, not only is it not the greatest drum kit, I haven't made an attempt to tune the drums, and furthermore, a lot of these cymbals have got weights on them, they're double stacked. This one under here, there's a smaller cymbal underneath, and that's to create some unusual sounds. So if when you hear the recording back, the cymbals sound crazy, that part at least is intentional. I've got the MT4x in the corner of my room, just beside my drum kit, so that I can observe the levels coming into the machine as I practice on the drums. In this first recording, I'm going to be recording to 3 tracks simultaneously. I've got a left-hand side of the stereo image overhead microphone coming into track 1, right-hand overhead is coming to track 2, and a microphone about a foot out from the kick drum is coming into channel 3. The main thing is to show you how you record to several tracks simultaneously, since in the previous example I was recording on track 1, then track 2, and then track 3, and so on. We can see that I've got tracks 1, 2, and 3 armed. If we look at channel 1, I'm in the up, which is the mic line position. I'm in this greyed out area, 7 or 8, just because the signal coming from the mixer, which is just acting as a glorified phantom power source, is already at line level. I want to send the output of this mixer channel to track 1 of the tape. Therefore, the 1, 2 assigned bus is depressed, but the 3, 4 is not. 1 is an odd number, so I'm panned hard left. The output of this channel 2 of the mixer I want to send to track 2. Therefore, I have assigned button 1, 2 depressed, not 3, 4, but I'm panned hard right. The output of mixer channel 3 is going to go to tape track number 3. Therefore, I don't have assigned button 1, 2 pushed down. I've got assigned button 3, 4 pushed down. 3 is an odd number, so I'm panned left. With this rehearsal button at the bottom lit, if I just start hitting the drums, you'll see the signal coming through on these meters here. Press stop to disarm rehearsal, press record, and then play, and I'm going for a take. Let's listen back to that first recording. Both of these channels are now in tape mode. I've got the left and right overhead panned hard left and right to maintain a stereo image. I've got the kick drum in the centre. Bear in mind, this is just the camera picking up the sound of not very good monitors in the room. Kick's a little bit overpowering. I just pull it back a little bit. I like that blend. We could pan that all to the right, losing the stereo information, bounce it to track number 4, meaning that we could overdub these original recordings with overdubs of guitar, bass and vocals, imagining it was a rock band. Alternatively, we could keep that stereo mix, capture it into a DAW so we had tapey sounding drums alongside digital overdubs in a sort of hybrid approach, or dump the stereo output to 2 tracks on a later stage of the cassette. We'd still have room for 2 tape overdubs. And then you could repeat that process of creating a reduction mix or external bounce several times if the complexity of your arrangement required it. In this second demo, I'm going to commit 6 different signals to a stereo pair on 2 tracks. From left to right, we have plugged in a kick microphone, close mic'd snare, close mic'd rack tom, and a close mic'd floor tom. A combination of a pair of overhead microphones and a pair of ribbon microphones in front of the kit is being blended as a stereo pair that's going into the 2 inputs of this compressor. The compressor's set up so I'm just getting about 3 dB gain reduction. The output of that compressor is plugged into auxiliary return number 1, which is stereo. Because these signals are going to end up combining, I've got them individually a bit quiet. So at the moment, we're only seeing the inputs coming from these 4 close mics. That's because at the moment I haven't connected the output from this compressor to the stereo bus by pressing the assign button up here. But the assign button 1, 2 is pressed down for all 4 of these channels. And then I've got a little stereo blend set up where the kick drum's in the dead center. Snare's just off to the right of that. Rack tom's a little bit closer to the center, and then the floor tom's quite far off to the left. I'm making a stereo image as though I were standing in front of my own drum kit. If I just play a little bit around the kick, snare, and the toms, you're going to see these 2 meters light up. Snare's a little bit over to the right. Floor tom's louder in the left-hand channel. Kick's pretty much in the centre. Now, to monitor how loud the levels are coming back from the compressor, what I'll do is disconnect all of those channels and connect the output from the compressor by pressing the assign 1, 2 button for auxiliary return 1. So I'm really only hitting 0 dB with the flams on the snare. So I can exit rehearsal mode by pressing stop, press record, pause, and then play. And I am now recording a combination of all 6 inputs to 2 channels in stereo. Now let's play back the second recording I made. And so from there we could start adding reverb to it using the auxiliary sends. We could bounce that to another stereo pair on tracks 3 and 4, hitting the tape hard, adding some tape saturation which would give us a bit more thwack on the transients. But the main purpose of the demonstration was just to show you how we can combine multiple inputs into 1 or 2 tracks depending whether we want to have mono or stereo on playback. But I hope for the meantime that's given you a good sense of what all the switches do and how to use them. If you'd like to see more content like this, please do subscribe. If you're interested in fixing this sort of stuff, in addition to literally hundreds of videos that I have on the subject up here on YouTube, I have a Patreon where I upload tales from the workbench pretty regularly. It doesn't cost a lot to join and it helps me out. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon.